All right, I'm not going to get you guys standing up and greeting each other. I'm going to take that one out today. But our passage today is going to come from Luke 15, 11 through 32. Luke 15, 11 through 32. We're on the last sermon in our sermon series of the parables. Luke 15, 11 through 32, and today's message is called The Two Sons. I'll read the word to you guys. And he said, "There was a man who had two sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me.' And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took a journey into far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, and he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe, put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of his servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound.' But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. He answered his father, 'Look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who had devoured your property with prostitutes, you have killed the fattened calf for him.' And he said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found.'" The word of the Lord. Let's pray. Dear God, I just thank you so much just for drawing us here. Lord, I pray that you may open up our ears and our hearts to receive your truths and your word. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be holy and pleasing to you. May your gospel be preached, and may your Holy Spirit work inside of our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So we've been in this series called The Parables, where Jesus tells stories that connect to our lives, and he teaches us a spiritual truth in them. Today I was actually going to start the skeptical series, but I actually held back a little bit, and I said, hey, it's our church's birthday. I really want to preach from a passage of the Bible that would beautifully illustrate the crux of what we believe in as a church. There's a reason why we call ourselves Grace Point. It's more than proving a point, more than answering questions well, and the aim of our church is to point to the very thing that gives us any type of significance. It's pointing to the cross, pointing to the grace of God given to us. The point of our existence is to do this. And the reason why we even tackle hard questions or even do anything that we do is to simply do this better. And today's passage is actually a very popular one. If any of you guys been in church for any number of years, or have grown up in church, or just heard different stories from the Bible, you might have come across this one. It's often called the parable of the prodigal son, a guy that runs away and then comes back to the father. You know, you would think that researching a parable that you've read so many times, it would make it less powerful when you read it. But it wasn't the case for me. The more I read and the more I looked at it, the more I researched, the more I was overwhelmed by the grace of God. This parable is about the lost, about the return of those who are lost, those that have run away or those that have been misplaced coming back to the Father. Even before our parable today, there's actually two other parables before it, talking about the lost coin and also the lost sheep, where the owners will go out their way to find that thing that they lost. Let me ask you guys, have you guys ever lost something so important that you literally spent all day looking for it? I mean, it drives you insane. You're looking everywhere. Sometimes you look so much, you start looking in the toilet. Did I drop it in there? You're like, you start looking for it. You keep looking for it. One of the worst feelings in this world, I don't know if you guys ever had that experience, like you're at somewhere, maybe at the mall or something, and then you come out, you use the bathroom, and then you get into your car, and you drive out for about 10 minutes, and you're just kind of chilling, and you're like, oh man, I want to listen to some Pandora, and you look for your phone, and you can't find it, you're like, where did I leave it? And you're reviewing all the steps that you had, and then you realize, oh my gosh, when I washed my hands, I put my phone on there, and I washed my hands, and I just left it there, and you're like, what am I going to do? And then you just bust a U-turn, and you go back. You're going back to the place. You're like, is it even worth going back? Someone probably took it. I need to find my iPhone. I should drive home and look for this, catch that sucker that took it. And you're like thinking all these things, but you're like, finally, I'm going to go back, 10-minute drive back, and you get to the place, you go into the bathroom, and you look at the place where you left the phone, and then you find it. No one took it. You know that feeling, like you're like, oh, you feel like God is like watching you, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's still there, and you're like, it's such a good day, and you grab it and you look at it, you're like, oh, you give it a kiss and put it in your pocket. Like, I almost lost $500. But that's the type of feeling that we need to understand. When the lost come back to God, when something lost that is found, it's that joyous moment. And this is what the parable is talking about. Oftentimes when we hear about this parable, we think about this one guy called so-called prodigal son that, went out, messed up his life, and he came back, and the father loves him. And like, oh, that one guy. And we point to the prodigal son, and it's like, okay, it's all about this guy. But he's actually not the main character. The main character is actually the father. And he's not the only son. There's actually another son that we learn about. There's two sons that the gospel speaks and embraces. The younger son is a quintessential rebel. He does what he wants, breaks all the rules, wastes everything, and he always messes up. The second son, he's kind of like the goody two-shoes. He follows all the rules. He listens to dad very well. He's a teacher's pet. He does everything perfectly. Yet in this passage, it talks about him being lost too. See, Jesus is speaking to a crowd of a mixed bunch. On one side, there's the sinners, the tax collectors, the people that you look down upon, the prostitutes and all the bad people. And on the other side, you see the Pharisees that have kept every single rule from day one. They're like straight. They wear collared shirts all the time and khaki pants and tuck it in. They're like the preppy boys. And then there's the hoodlums on the other side. And Jesus is speaking to both of these crowds, and he's saying, both of you guys are lost. And it speaks about this parable. Let's just jump in. Let's first meet the first brother. Jesus starts off with the stereotypical sinner, and he talks about what happened to him. Let's read this. Verse 11 and 12 says this. And he said, there was a man who had two sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. The gravity of this situation is a lot deeper than you think. It's not a simple request of like a teenager or a college boy coming back saying, Mom, I need some money, or Dad, I need some money. But it's a guy that's going to him saying, you know what? I know the tradition. I know when you die, some of this house is going to be mine. Some of your money is going to be mine. It's going to be passed down to me. I know it is. You know it is. He was like, but I can't wait till you're dead. Dad, can we speed up this process? Like, he's basically going up to his dad saying, hey, Pops, I know that when you eventually die, I'm probably going to get some of your house, your bank account. Can we speed up this process? And think about what needs to happen for this son to get the money and family, fortune, and property that he's asking for. He's saying, hey, Dad, can you sell the big house that you're living in right now? Downgrade a little bit. You don't need it right now. You downgrade. I'll get out of that room. You can use one less room. Downgrade. Dad, can you sell some of your animals? Maybe you can keep the cows, but let me get the pigs. Let's sell the pigs. Let me get that part. Dad, can you give some of your land? I mean, you don't need all of that. Can you sell some of your servants? Dad, can you hurry up? See, back then, family was everything. Wealth belonged to the family, and he's basically saying, I don't want a relationship with you. I don't want to live in your house anymore. I don't want to follow your rules. I don't want any of that. You know what? Let's act like you're already dead, and I'll get out your way. Give me my part of it, and I'll get on my way. See, when we look at the younger brother, he's kind of like the rebel. He has no shame. He does what he wants to do. He's one of the free-spirited guys that are out there. He doesn't care about tradition. He does what he wants, and he wants to be free from authority. The younger son, I think he's kind of like our new generation. I mean, we don't really believe in right or wrong anymore. We do what we want. We forget about God's commandments, forget about family honor, forget about values. I mean, these days, values is what you find value in, no matter how shallow it is. But amazingly, the father gives him the money. He liquidates everything and he gives it to him. Now you have to imagine, the father is he's not stupid. He probably knows that he's going to squander it all. I mean, one thing that I hate to admit, and I'll never say this to my mother, but she's probably outside, but I hate it. I hate it because parents often know us better than we like to admit. Isn't this true? That's why every word that they say kind of hurts our feelings, because they know our weaknesses, they know what we don't like, and every time they poke at it, it hurts a lot. And I imagine this is the same for this guy. His father gives him what he wants, but he knows what he's going to do about it. Parents know their weaknesses. They know when they're going to fail at something because they know they know your tendencies. But notice at the end of the day, the father gives a choice to give this man what he wants, or this boy what he wants. So he liquidates everything, gives it to the guy. And the parable continues. It says this: not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took a journey into the far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. Going away into a distant country is not just a geographical distance. It also means emotional distance. It also means psychological distance, distancing oneself from one's family, one's parents, one's community, wanting to be away from it, cutting off friends, cutting off things. I mean, they say you have to be careful when you want to be in isolation to do what you want, right? One of the first signs of people falling into something bad is when they begin to avoid everyone. You know, that friend that begins to cut off all of their good friends that would call them out on what they would do? They don't want to hear it. You cut them off. They don't want to go to church anymore. If they see the pastor at church, they don't make eye contact and they go to the back. I see it, and they hide from family. No one knows who their boyfriend or girlfriend is. It's like a secret until they actually let it known. There's a saying that I've heard when growing up, especially as a young teen. The guy's like, yo, I know you don't watch porn in the living room. You hide and you do it at a distance. And this is all to say that you have to be careful in going to the distant country of your own. So the boy goes into the distant country and he squanders everything. And I can just imagine maybe he bought a nice car or maybe a nice donkey. They didn't have cars back then. He probably rented out a 5-star mud hotel. I don't know. I generalize, but I know it's not that bad. He buys good food. I imagine he made some new friends. The type of people that are around you when you have money, they're like your entourage, but they disappear that quick too. The parable also implies that he probably used money on women. The older brother thinks so. Prostitutes. He knows the younger brother's tendencies. And either way, the son is left with nothing. He lost it all. Everything. You think $1 million is a lot, but you can use that really, really fast. And then verse 14 kicks in. He says, as he lost everything, a famine comes in. When I looked at that, I was like, why a famine? I was like, why did Jesus say a famine right here? I'm like, he has it bad enough, but a famine. But isn't it true? This is what sin does. When you're down, it stomps you down even further. It makes the situation a lot worse. I was reading different things about famines back then. They really hit hard. They said people ate garbage. They ate sandals even. They ate stray animals on the street. And they said even in Israel's history at one point when they were sieged inside of their town by enemies and they had no food, they began to eat each other. This is a very bad moment, and I think Jesus wanted to describe the most horrible situation ever. And in the verse 15, it says that he went and hired himself out. It's interesting because in Greek here, the word kalao means to glue or to cleave. And this is what kind of beggars did at the time. They never got hired. Nobody wanted them around, but they would just go into somebody's house and just stick around. They glued themselves. And this is what he's doing. He got to the point where he had no money. He was the son of a rich guy, but now he's gluing himself to random people. And nobody wants him. No one wants to feed him food. They're like, okay, go hang out with the pigs if you're going to be here. Because, back then they were, hospitality was kind of like a thing that you had to do, so they were forced to do it. So he's eating with the pigs. He's all alone. It's an extreme picture that Jesus is describing, the lowest anyone can go. And I think he's trying to explain the most shameful position that anyone can be in. The shame of asking your father for money, the shame of losing it all, the shame of begging, and the shame of losing everything and eating with pigs. Back then, pigs were also known as unclean. And we can't ignore this theme of shame in this parable. It was a shame and honor society back then, and the boy was sinful and shameful as can be. And I really believe that Jesus at a moment is describing a life apart from the Father, apart from God, apart from his wisdom, apart from his family. Guys, this is kind of like hell on earth, right? Hell is literally being away from God the Father. But it's often true, right? It takes rock bottom to be able to see reality at times. You can't see a slippery slope until you slip and fall, and then you're like, yo, it's slippery. And you don't know what you have until you lose it all. And this is where the boy is at. He's eating with the pigs. He's holding on to this household that doesn't want him there. He's, when you have everything, people are all around you. But when you have nothing, you become a leech. And this is. And at that moment, he has a moment of stopping and thinking, and he says this: how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? At that moment, when he's on rock bottom, he lost it all. He thinks about the Father. Now imagine there's a reason why he's thinking about his father. He's clinging on to this bad master that doesn't want him around, that's giving him and go eat with the pigs. And he's imagining his father. Hired servants back then were not real servants. They were people that you showed grace to give them work because you feel bad for them. Those were hired servants. He was like, even my father, with his hired servants, he gives them more than enough to eat. And why am I here with this bad servant when I could have a bad master, when I can have somebody else? So he says, he thinks, he realizes, and he says, I want to say this, Father, I've sinned against you, against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. The boy realizes his misery, hopelessness, and sin, and realizes that even the lowest of the low in the Father's house is better than anything else somewhere else. Maybe he stops and sings to himself, better is one day in your courts, better is one day in your house, better is one day in your courts than thousands elsewhere. And as he sings that, he's like, yo, I got to get back. And he heads home. And I can only imagine what's running in this boy's head when he's walking back home. I mean, have you guys ever been in a position where you knew you were going to get it when you got back home? Like you knew you were going to get it. Like you saw like an ad on I don't know, somewhere for a motorcycle for really cheap, and you went and bought that motorcycle, and your wife is going to kill you when you get home, and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Or you went out to the casino with your friends and you dropped the entire paycheck on a game of blackjack, and you're like, I got to go home now. My wife is going to kill me, and you're rehearsing what you're going to say. Like, I wanted to work for that vacation for us, but I lost it. And I imagine he's walking home, repeating those words to himself, saying, oh God, Father, I've sinned against you, against heaven. That means I sinned up to heaven. Like I sinned that much. I'm so sorry. And he's picturing that over and over again, walking home. Let's change positions for a moment, though. What would you do if you were the father? What if your kids did this? They'd be having my bat ready, like, oh, this guy's gonna get it. Like, you can call protective services. You can do whatever you want. You're gonna get it, But I imagine the Pharisees are thinking the same way too. I mean, as usual back in that culture, they're probably thinking, oh man, this guy got major restitutions. He got to work it back. He's going to be a hired servant for the rest of his life. He got to get publicly shamed in the whole town so the town knows that it's not the father's fault, but it's the son's. The honor got to be back. But I really believe that Jesus wanted to change everybody's idea about who God was. Oftentimes we think that God is this God ready to throw lightning bolts at us when we're not doing well, or a God that is calculating all of our wrongs and wants to make us pay back. But Jesus describes God in a different way. Verse 20 says this: but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced and kissed him. The father just doesn't sit there waiting for him with the bat, sitting on the porch, smoking a cigar, saying, I'm going to kill this guy when he comes back. He doesn't do that. He doesn't sit there. Actually, our passage says that he sees him in a long distance and he runs. He runs. And I looked at this, I'm like, oh, why is this guy running? Back then, in that culture, men didn't run. Grown men didn't run. I mean, they would look like little girls if they had to lift up their robes and run. They didn't do it. In fact, they never showed their ankles. They said it was so shameful that even if they're walking through a patch full of thorns, they would never put up their robes because you'd rather rip your robe than to show your ankles. That was that shameful. But this guy runs. And I imagine like even me as a regular guy that's not even like, I don't even like running. When I was in high school and the bus is waiting for you and like you have this choice like to run or to walk. And like to run, you look like an idiot because you're late, and people are like, "Oh, they're shameful." I remember back then I used to be like, "I'm gonna strut. I'm good. You can wait for me over there. I'm gonna strut." We don't like running. You see that all the time. Even when you're walking across the street, you don't run. You're like, "Just wait. I'm gonna walk." And but it's the same type of idea. But the father runs. As he sees his son from a far distance, he runs, exposing his legs, shaming himself by pulling his robe up like a little boy. And he runs to his son. And I was wondering, I was like, why the heck is he running? I mean, he could have waited. He could have waited and embraced him later. But I was reading some commentary by John MacArthur, and I'd never seen this before. But it said this, the father runs for a reason. It's a shame-based culture. And for this younger brother to walk through town in his dirt and shame, that means the whole town's going to look at him, point fingers at him, saying, this is the guy that messed up. He's going to get mocked and ridiculed by the entire town. There's the reason that the father runs when he's far off. He runs all the way there. He'd rather be shamed himself than to watch his own son be shamed. And he goes and looks. As he runs, he says this. Probably the younger brother, as he sees the father running towards him, he's probably repeating the lines, Father, I've sinned against you in heaven. And he's repeating all these things. But right when the father gets there and he's about to say this, he actually cuts him off mid-sentence and says this. Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand, shoes on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. The robe covers all of his shame, covers all of his dirt. The ring establishes his authority as son again. Shoes are actually really significant. Only slaves didn't wear shoes. There was no way this father was going to let him pay back, or become a hired servant to make restitutions. The boy was expecting to work the rest of his life. But before he can finish his sentence, he is kissed and embraced by the father. Guys, this is grace. The son doesn't have to pay anything back. In fact, it's the father that came to him, the father that does everything to redeem him. And this teaches us about something about salvation that lies at the crux of our faith. This is why we call the gospel the good news. Because salvation doesn't come by what we do or what we can pay back. Trust me, none of us are that good to make it to heaven. Just like there was no way that this son would ever be able to pay back all of that he lost by working his entire life. Hired servants made nothing. Salvation doesn't come by earning it because we can never earn enough. It comes by someone else paying for it, somebody eating the cost. It comes from a father bringing shame to himself to make us whole again. Doesn't this change the way we look at God? I mean, it's so countercultural. I mean, when's the last time the world shows us grace? It doesn't. The world will put you in jail and ruin your credit before you get shown any grace. You don't get grace. You don't pay your bills. You get kicked out of the house. But when we look at this, we see just punishment is replaced by celebration. Just punishment is replaced by celebration. The whole town was supposed to mock him, but the whole town is celebrating because of what the father does. The fattened calf is killed and the entire town eats. Meat was only for special occasions, only for like marriage celebrations. And I really believe this is what heaven is. It's a marriage celebration. Punishment is replaced by celebration. And that's only through the Father's grace. Do you know that this is God's promise to us if we look upon him? Look at his goodness. If we come to our senses and walk back to the Father, you'll find him waiting for you. And not only that, he'll run to you. You don't have to fix yourself before coming to God. So many times I hear this like, oh man, I got to fix myself, then I'll come back to church. Or I got to fix myself before I come before God. I got to fix myself before I serve. I got to fix myself before I do anything. No. Just come Just come. God runs to you and he'll fix you. He'll cover you with his robe, put a ring on your finger and shoes on your feet. This is the gospel. But we can't forget the older son. There's always a bitter side to when someone gets something they don't deserve. Isn't this true? Our passage said that the older brother was working in the field, and when he came closer, notice that he never walks into the house. He doesn't even go to the father to ask him what's going on. It shows us that he really doesn't have a relationship with his dad. He gets one of his servants to ask. Servant comes back, tells him what's going on. The brother is back, and they're having a feast. The brother is furious. The older brother is kind of the type of guy that hates watching movies where the bad guys win. He's like, that's so unjust. He's got to die. Chances are the brother knew that his brother was going to be back, crawling on his feet. He knew. He was waiting for this moment. He just couldn't wait till the brothers came back and he lost it all and he wanted to rub it in his face. And now he's probably imagining the smirk that this little kid probably had, like he got away with it again. You got to imagine, people's character doesn't just happen in one moment. The younger brother's probably like this his entire life. And the older brother couldn't stand it. Younger brother's back, and think about how much he would have been mad that he had taken almost 1/3 of the family portion, the fortune, and wasted it all. And now he even killed the fattened calf, taking more of what was actually his. Spend more money on that bum? That's my money. But here we find the heart of the older brother as well. Look at verse 29. It says this. He goes up to the father. The father actually comes to him, but he says this. Look, these many years I've served you. I've never disobeyed your commandment, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But this son of yours came, who devoured your property with prostitutes, and you killed a fattened calf for him. In other words, this is a mentality. God, Dad, I've been slaving away for you. I've been putting up with you. I've been living up in this house with you. You think I wanted to do that? I had to do it. But now you're giving my stuff away? You think I actually wanted to do all that? Dad, I didn't want to live with you. I didn't want to do all that. And you see the heart. The boys had the same heart. They didn't care about the father. They didn't care about the family. They didn't care about the father's will. They're just waiting for their own piece of the pie. It's just that the older brother did it by doing good things, and the younger brother did it by doing bad things. It's the same heart. Your older brother's heart is what we call a religious heart. A heart that is only concerned about God or the Father by what he gives to us. Yes, the older brother was at home, but he had no relationship with the father either. He's just as lost as the brother. There's a truth to be learned. Some people are lost outside of the church. Some people are lost in the far country. But there are so many that are lost just the same within the church. And truth be told, religious people have the same hearts because superficially, religious people are jealous of the prodigals. They all have the same heart. They wanted it. They're like, man, this guy sinned and got away with it, but I've never done any of that. And they want it too. It's the same type of heart. They have the same desire for sin, and they are jealous and envious of those who have lived it out without thinking of the consequences. And he's even self-righteous, saying, I never disobeyed you. What a lie. But guys, the gospel goes so far as reaching out to the religious as well. And the Father goes to him and says, you are always with me, and all that is mine is also yours. The kingdom is yours. Trust in me. Trust in me. And let me ask you guys, what son are you? Here we find the sons of rebellion and religion, the rebellious and the religious. The rebellious is all about doing what we want, not caring about things and just taking whatever, running away, wasting everything. And the religious is all about rules and regulations. They want everything to be kept perfect. The rebellious tend to be more liberal, while the religious tend to be more conservative. The rebellious tend to be immoral, while the religious are the moral police. The rebellious are disobedient, while the religious are obedient to the T. The rebellious are often lazy, but the religious are often diligent. But the rebellious, they are unrighteous, but the religious are self-righteous, which is just as unrighteous. The two brothers are polar opposites, but they have one thing in common. They both don't care about the Father, and they both use him to get what they want. The rebellious son uses the Father to sin and to have fun. And the religious is just using the Father to build an empire. You know, guys, this is something really deep because it changes the way we look at sin. A lot of times we look at sin, we think it's these outer things that we do wrong and we point fingers, oh, you did wrong. No, there's sin that is visible and sin that are invisible. The invisible sins are like the pride, the self-righteousness that someone has, the critical spirit of looking down on others. There are more sides to sin than we think. And I always think that the religious may be a little bit more dangerous because at least the younger son had a moment where he saw everything and said, man, I am a sinner. But the older brother doesn't see that. And I think he's speaking to the Pharisees and everybody right now at this moment saying, guys, you guys both need this gospel thing. You know, it's weird. Those of you guys that have more than one kids, you guys probably know the whole juggling political factor of always having to buy 2 gifts instead of 1. Because you know if you buy 1 gift, the other one's going to go crazy. And you know these things. You know, kids won't shut up unless things are fair. They'll say, it's not fair. She got the new toy and I didn't. He got a cookie, but what about me? And it sounds all righteous and good. We all should have equal rights. But you know what's interesting is that the same kid that sings about equality will not say a single word if it benefits them. Notice that. I don't think I ever heard a kid complain that he got a cookie and someone else didn't. No, he hides that in his pocket real quick, goes in somewhere else and starts nibbling at it and eating it and says he didn't get one. Fairness is only advocated when it benefits them. And when we look at this, at the end of the day, both are fallen and sinful. Both need grace and forgiveness. Which son are you? You know, I've heard so many sermons on this particular passage, but one in particular, I think a guy named Tim Keller, a pastor at New York, he mentions the third son. And you know, you really don't see a third son in this parable, but you know that the third son is there because the third son is speaking of this parable. He's actually telling it. You know, back in that culture, it was always the older brother that took the weight. Maybe some of you guys in different cultures know that the older son always gets punished for everything. But except that the first son wasn't playing that role, but Jesus does play that role. Jesus, as the Son of God, becomes a sacrifice for the entire family. For the brothers and sisters who are like us, sinful, the third son, who was sinless, who lived only for the God Father's glory, as a greater brother, he gives us a part of his own inheritance, even when we squandered our own. And the older brother that took our punishment, he was whipped and beaten and crucified for us, so that we can get a piece of the pie too. We need a better older brother to guide us and to set the pace. And the older brother takes everything for us, and he gives it. You know, John Piper, a Baptist pastor, said this once. He said, Jesus did not end the parables with go and do likewise. And Luke did not end this chapter with go and imitate Jesus. The first point is just look at him. Look at him. Consider Jesus. Know Jesus. Learn what kind of person he is. And love and worship him. Soak in the shadow of Jesus. Saturate your soul with the ways of Jesus. Watch him and listen to him. Stand in all of him. And let him overwhelm you with the way he is. Let us pray. Dear God, I thank you so much for being the Father that will go out of his way to shame himself so that we may get a chance of standing in honor and glory. I thank you, O Lord, for you are not a God that counts our wrongs.